Kansas City's Northeast District in 1989 wasn't the kind of place you read about in travel brochures. The houses along Van Brunt Boulevard had seen better days: peeling paint, chain-link fences, yards where grass gave up trying. This was a working-class neighborhood where people knew each other's business, where screen doors slammed on summer evenings, and where parents told their kids to be home before the streetlights came on. But beneath that familiar rhythm, something darker had been brewing. Between 1982 and 1994, a dozen women between the ages of 13 and 31 either disappeared or turned up dead in northeast Kansas City. Some were sex workers. Others were just young women trying to get by. Their bodies were found in rivers, beaten and mutilated. The cases followed a pattern that made detectives' skin crawl, though they couldn't quite pin down a single suspect. The neighborhood knew. People whispered. Mothers held their daughters a little tighter. And in that same neighborhood, on East 9th Street, the Cox family tried to build something safe. Something normal. They almost succeeded. The orange dumpster truck had been parked in the same spot beneath the second-floor windows for so long that nobody in the Cox household really saw it anymore. Just part of the landscape on Van Brunt Boulevard, John Cox's work truck, sitting there as it had always been sitting there, beneath the windows where three sisters slept on summer nights when the Kansas City heat made the upstairs rooms feel like ovens. That truck will become a ladder to murder. July 25th, 1989. Fawn Marie Cox is 16 years old, working the late shift at Worlds of Fun amusement park. It's a Tuesday night, and the park is still crowded with families squeezing the last drops out of summer vacation before school starts again. Fawn stands behind her register in the ticketing booth, counting bills and making change. She's been doing this all summer, saving every dollar she can. The math is simple. She needs $1,500 for a decent used car. She's already got $900 tucked away. By the time senior year starts at Northeast High School, she'll have wheels. Freedom. The ability to drive herself to work, to school, to wherever life takes her next. She's methodical about it. Responsible. That's who Fawn is, the eldest daughter who helps raise her younger sisters, Amber and Felisa. The girl who works long shifts without complaint. The one who roller skates with her siblings on weekends and never misses Sunday church. The one her parents can count on. Her best friend, Donna McGee, lives directly across the street. They've been inseparable since childhood, spending summer evenings on Donna's porch talking about boys, about high school drama, about the small, enormous concerns of teenage life. Donna knows Fawn's dreams. Graduate, maybe go to college, get out of this neighborhood, build something better. The cash register dings. Another transaction. Another family heading toward the roller coasters, their evening just beginning. Fawn has no way of knowing hers is ending. What Fawn doesn't know, what she can't possibly know, is that the person who will kill her tonight has eaten dinner at her family's table, has memorized the layout of her home, knows exactly which window never locks, knows the family's routines, knows that on Tuesday nights, Fawn works late, comes home exhausted, and goes straight to bed, knows she'll be alone upstairs, separated from her family by the deafening roar of an ancient air conditioner. And for 31 years, his identity will remain hidden in the place she'd least expect to find a monster, at the family dinner table. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the Cox family home. The two-story house sat in the shadow of the 9th Street Dogs, a local gang whose reputation for burglaries, theft, and violence cast a long shadow over the entire neighborhood. Everyone knew about them. Everyone feared them. Parents warned their children to stay clear. Neighbors installed extra locks and kept their porch lights burning all night. But the Cox home itself had a layout that made perfect sense for a family trying to make ends meet. John and Beverly had converted their first-floor dining room into a bedroom, so their three daughters could have more space upstairs. Fawn had her own room. Amber and Felisa shared another. A bathroom connected them, old-fashioned in design, with walls so thin you could hear everything. Conversations, laughter, running water, creaking floorboards. But here's what made the house vulnerable. What turned a practical family decision into an open invitation. Years earlier, the family had locked themselves out. Amber, tomboyish, fearless, always the one willing to climb trees and scale fences, had scrambled up the side of the house to Fawn's second-floor window and gotten them back inside. It became a story they told at family gatherings, one of those small adventures that makes everyone laugh. After that day, it became policy to keep the upstairs windows unlocked during summer. for ventilation, for emergencies, for the breeze that made the oppressive Kansas City humidity bearable when you didn't have air conditioning upstairs. It was practical. It was innocent. It was what every family in the neighborhood did. And it was also an invitation to anyone who knew the house well enough, anyone who'd been inside, anyone who understood the rhythms of the family's life. The orange dumpster truck parked directly beneath those windows? That was just convenience. John Cox ran a waste management business, and parking the truck at home made sense. Nobody thought twice about it. Nobody saw it for what it really was, a perfect ladder positioned exactly where someone would need it. The Cox family owned exactly one air conditioning unit. This detail matters more than you might think. That single machine, loud, ancient, probably older than Fawn herself, was wedged into the window of John and Beverly's first-floor bedroom. It rumbled and wheezed like a dying engine, but it worked. It kept that one room bearable. The problem was the noise. That air conditioner didn't just cool the air. It drowned out everything else. Conversations, footsteps, doors opening. Anything happening upstairs might as well have been happening in another house entirely. Felisa, the youngest, had taken to sleeping on the couch in her parents' room just to escape the heat. Amber was often across the street at Donna's, babysitting to earn extra money. But Fawn valued her privacy more than she minded the heat. She liked having her own space, her own sanctuary where she could think and dream and be alone with her thoughts after long shifts at Worlds of Fun. So on summer nights, Fawn slept upstairs, alone, separated from her family by distance, heat, and the relentless mechanical roar of that air conditioner. The only security she had was a broken door lock and a steak knife wedged into the doorframe. A teenager's improvised solution to a problem her parents hadn't gotten around to fixing yet. That knife would later be found at the crime scene. Around 11 o'clock on July 25th, Beverly and Felisa drive to Worlds of Fun for pickup. It's become routine. Fawn's shift ends at 11, and rather than have her take the bus or get a ride from coworkers, Beverly picks her up. Fawn slides into the back seat, exhausted. Her feet ache from hours of standing on concrete. Her voice is hoarse from answering the same questions 100 times. Yes, we have family packages. No, you can't bring outside food. Yes, the park closes at 10. She just wants her bed. When they arrive home around 11:30, the house is sweltering. Even with all the windows open, the upstairs feels like a sauna. The air is thick and still, the kind of heat that makes your skin sticky and your thoughts sluggish. Downstairs, John is already asleep, his snoring audible even over the air conditioner. He's a deep sleeper, the kind who could sleep through a tornado. Felisa settles onto the couch in her parents' room, seeking refuge from the heat. Fawn climbs the stairs alone. She changes into her nightshirt. She sets her alarm for the next morning. She's got another shift at Worlds of Fun tomorrow, and she needs to be up by 9. She takes that steak knife, the one she's been using for weeks now, and wedges it carefully into the doorframe. It's not perfect security, but it's something. It makes her feel safer. Then she climbs into bed and closes her eyes. Downstairs, the air conditioner roars its white noise symphony. John's snoring provides a bass line. Beverly drifts off beside him. Felisa curls up on the couch. The house settles into silence. But Fawn is not alone. Somewhere in that upstairs hallway, hidden in the darkness, someone is waiting. Someone who knows this house intimately. Someone who knows Fawn's room is the one at the end of the hall. Someone who knows about the broken lock and the improvised knife wedge. Someone who's been patient enough to wait until the house went quiet, until he could be certain everyone was asleep, until the roar of that air conditioner would mask any sound he might make. Someone who's been planning this. Between midnight and 2 in the morning, something changes. The family's poodle, a small, pregnant dog that's normally calm and gentle, suddenly becomes frantic. This dog has never acted like this before. She's whimpering, then barking with an urgency that cuts through even the rumble of the air conditioner. It's not the restless sound of a dog that needs to go outside. It's something else. Something primal. The sound of an animal sensing danger in a way that humans can't articulate. Felisa stirs on the couch. She's groggy, irritated, pulled from the edge of sleep. She gets up, crosses the room to where the dog is pacing and whining. She speaks softly, trying to calm her. "It's okay, girl. You're okay." The The dog eventually quiets, though she remains tense, watchful. Felicia assumes it's pregnancy nerves. The dog is due any day now. Maybe the discomfort is keeping her awake. Maybe she's nesting, anxious about the puppies to come. But that dog knew. Animals sense danger in ways we've lost. They can smell fear, detect changes in air pressure, and hear frequencies beyond human range. That poodle was screaming a warning that no one understood. She knew someone was in the house who shouldn't be there. She knew Fawn was in danger. But Felicia, half asleep and focused on calming the dog, doesn't connect the dots. Nobody does. She goes back to the couch. The house returns to quiet. The air conditioner hums. And upstairs in Fawn's bedroom, something unspeakable is happening. The monster doesn't hurry. He's patient, methodical. He knows he has time. He knows the air conditioner will drown out any noise. He knows Fawn is alone, vulnerable, and trusting. He uses that trust against her. July 26th arrives slowly, sunlight filtering through the curtains, the heat already building by 9 in the morning. Fawn's alarm clock begins to ring. It's one of those old mechanical alarms, the kind with actual bells inside, designed to wake the dead. The sound is relentless, shrill, impossible to ignore. It rings, and rings, and rings, but Fawn doesn't turn it off. John Cox needs the upstairs bathroom. He's one of those fathers who operates on routine up at the same time every day. Same morning rituals, same path through the house. He climbs the stairs, noting the alarm still blaring from Fawn's room. That's odd. Fawn is never a heavy sleeper. She's usually up before her alarm even finishes its first cycle. The bathroom connects to Fawn's bedroom through an adjoining door, an old house design, the kind where privacy is more suggestion than reality. It's not unusual for John to glimpse his daughters in their nightclothes during these morning routines. It's never been strange or inappropriate. Just the reality of living in a house with one bathroom and 3 teenage daughters. But this morning feels different. He glances through the doorway into Fawn's room. She's lying in bed, motionless, in an odd position. Something about the scene doesn't sit right. He notices she's not wearing underwear beneath her nightshirt, unusual and concerning. He quickly pulls a blanket over her to preserve her modesty, then continues to the bathroom. He thinks she's just sleeping deeply. Maybe she's sick. Maybe she had a harder shift than usual yesterday. He'll check on her in a minute after he's finished. But downstairs, Beverly Cox is growing uneasy. That alarm has been ringing for 10, maybe 15 minutes now. Fawn is never a heavy sleeper. Something is wrong. A mother's instinct screams in the back of her mind. She calls up to Felicia. Go check on your sister. Felicia climbs the stairs, irritation mixing with worry. She's thinking about a dozen innocent explanations. Fawn stayed up too late, Fawn's alarm didn't wake her, and Fawn is feeling sick. She pushes open the door. Hey, wake up. Your alarm's been. Then she sees it. Fawn is lying completely still. Her body has an unnatural rigidity, a waxy quality to the skin. Her color is all wrong, a disturbing shade of blue-gray. There's fabric wrapped around her neck. A gown twisted tight. Felicia screams. The sound rips through the house, cutting through even the air conditioner's roar. It's a sound no parent should ever have to hear. The sound of a child discovering death. Beverly Cox runs up those stairs faster than she's ever moved in her life. When she sees her daughter lying there, her mind refuses to process what she's seeing. For one desperate, irrational moment, she wonders if Fawn did this to herself. Could she have? Was there something Fawn was struggling with that Beverly missed? Some pain she didn't see. But even as the thought forms, Beverly knows it's wrong. This isn't suicide. This is something else. Her hands shake so violently that she can barely dial 911. The numbers blur. Her voice cracks as she tries to explain to the dispatcher what she's seeing, what's happening, though part of her still can't believe it's real. The ambulance arrives within minutes. The paramedics take one look at Fawn and know immediately they're not here to save a life. They're here to preserve a crime scene. Fawn has been dead for hours. Her body is cold, stiff with rigor mortis. Whatever happened to her happened long before her alarm ever went off. The paramedics step back. This is a police matter now. When Amber comes home for her babysitting job across the street, she finds police cars lining Van Brunt Boulevard, yellow tape across the front door, and detectives swarming through the house she's lived in her entire life. Her parents are in shock, moving through the house like ghosts. Felisa is sobbing, wrapped in a blanket someone gave her. Neighbors are gathering on porches and lawns, whispering, speculating. And upstairs, detectives are beginning to understand exactly what happened. What they find will haunt Kansas City for the next 31 years. The detectives who enter Fawn's bedroom are veterans. They've seen violence before. But there's something about this scene that gets under their skin, the ordinariness of it. The teenage posters on the walls. The school books were stacked on the dresser. The alarm clock was still ringing when they first arrived. This should have been a safe space, a sanctuary. Instead, it's a crime scene. The initial findings are straightforward. Fawn has been strangled. The medical examiner will later confirm it as the cause of death. But there's more evidence of sexual assault. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This wasn't a random attack. This was deliberate, brutal, personal. But the crime scene tells a confusing story. In Fawn's closet, blankets have been yanked out and left in a heap on the floor. Why? Was someone hiding there, waiting? Down in the yard below the second-story window, the window to Amber and Felisa's room, not Fawn's, investigators find a stereo and a Nintendo console sitting in the grass. They're just lying there as if someone threw them out the window, planning to grab them on the way out, then abandon them in panic. The entry point is obvious. Someone climbed John's orange dumpster truck, scrambled onto the canopy of the outbuilding that sits against the house, and slipped through an unlocked window. From there, it was a straight shot to Fawn's room. Crime scene technicians begin the methodical work of collecting evidence. They find short hairs that don't belong to Fawn, small bloodstains, and critically, traces of semen on Fawn's bedsheet. In 1989, DNA evidence was nearly useless. They can compare blood types, but that's it. No genetic markers. No databases. No way to run the DNA against millions of samples to find a match. They also find something strange, an old army cap in Fawn's room. None of her family recognizes it. Fawn never wore hats. She wasn't interested in military memorabilia. Whose cap is it? Did the killer leave it behind? Then there's the steak knife. The same knife Fawn used to secure her broken door lock was now found at the scene. Had the killer used it to intimidate her? To keep her quiet? One detail troubles investigators more than anything. Fawn's bed is on wheels. Think about that. In a violent struggle, there are signs that this was violent, such as the bed would have rolled across the floor unless someone was holding it steady. Does that mean there were two attackers? One assaulting Fawn, the other keeping the bed from moving? But if there were two people, why does the DNA evidence show only one person's bodily fluids? It's a question that will remain unanswered for 3 decades. Within weeks, the investigation turns its focus to the 9th Street Dogs. The gang is notorious in northeast Kansas City. Everyone knows them. Everyone fears them. They're responsible for countless burglaries, thefts, and assaults. They move through the neighborhood as they own it. In many ways they do. But there's another connection that makes detectives suspicious. Fawn had been dating someone connected to the gang. Not a core member, but someone who ran in those circles. After Fawn's death, the boyfriend is so destroyed he enlists in the military and leaves Kansas City entirely, as if trying to outrun the memory of what happened. Then, in August 1989, just 1 month after the murder police arrested 3 teenagers. One of them is in Fawn's class at Northeast High School. They walk the same hallways, eat in the same cafeteria. The other 2 are known associates, local kids who've been in trouble before. The rest come because of a witness. Someone who knows specific things that the police deliberately withheld from the public. Details about the crime scene that only someone involved could know. For the first time since Fawn's death, her family feels something like hope. One of the teenagers is charged by a grand jury with first-degree murder. He's just 16 years old. He spends 8 months in jail while prosecutors build their case, while his court-appointed attorney fights the charges, while the Cox family prays that justice will finally be served. Then everything collapses. The DNA doesn't match. The fingerprints on the knife don't match. And the witness, the linchpin of the entire case, the person whose testimony was supposed to put this kid away forever, suddenly recants. They claim they lied. They stop cooperating. When pressed by prosecutors about why, they offer vague explanations about being scared, about being pressured, about not really knowing what they saw. Without testimony, without physical evidence linking these teenagers to the assault and murder, the prosecution has nothing. All 3 suspects have been released. Charges dropped. Case closed. But before they walk free, something remarkable happens. One of them confesses. The interrogation room is small, institutional, and designed to make suspects uncomfortable. The teenager sits across from the detectives, and he's talking. He admits it. All of it. He describes breaking into the Cox house that night. He details climbing the orange dumpster truck, the exact route up to the 2nd floor, and slipping through the window. He even provides specifics that the police never released to the public, like the tape recorder. When he threw it out the window to retrieve it later, the handle snapped off. He tells the detectives exactly where he hid it, tucked under a specific bush near the house, the one with the broken branches. Detectives search. They find it right where he said it would be, handle broken exactly as he described. This isn't a lucky guess. This is someone who was there. Someone who knows. But here's where his story takes a turn. He insists adamantly, repeatedly, that he and his friends only came to steal. They took the Nintendo, the stereo, and some radios. They threw them out the window to collect on their way out. According to him, they never went into Fawn's room. Never saw her. Never knew a murder was happening while they were burglarizing the house. He describes it as a simple property crime. Kids are being stupid, looking for stuff to sell. Nothing violent. Nothing like intimacy. Then, just as quickly as he opened up, he shuts down. He withdraws the confession. Stops talking. His attorney advises him to remain silent, and he does. The story evaporates like morning mist. Without his testimony, without DNA linking them to the intimate assault and murder, prosecutors have nothing they can take to trial. Yes, they can prove the burglary. One of the boys even served 8 months for stealing Fawn's belongings. But knowing someone was in the house and proving they killed Fawn are 2 very different things. The case goes cold. For the Cox family, this becomes a special kind of torture. They know those boys were in the house. The confession proves it. The stolen items prove it. But they also know deep in their bones that something doesn't add up. If those teenagers killed Fawn, why would only one person's DNA be found? Why would they describe a simple burglary if they'd committed rape and murder? And if they didn't kill her, then who did? Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months stretch into years. Fawn's real killer keeps walking free. The Cox family refuses to let Fawn become another statistic, another cold case that fades from memory. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, John and Beverly became warriors for their daughter. They hold fundraisers, bake sales, car washes, whatever it takes. They erect billboards across Kansas City with Fawn's picture and a plea. Do you know who killed Fawn Cox? Call Crime Stoppers. They offer rewards. $3,000 in 2000, then $5,000, then $10,000 in 2019. Beverly gives interview after interview, her voice steady but fractured by grief. Money does a lot on the streets. Somebody knows something. That's what we're hoping and praying for. But it's Amber who becomes the family's relentless investigator. She scours every true crime forum, every cold case website, every online discussion about unsolved murders. Whenever she finds people discussing Fawn's case, she reaches out. She thanks them for caring. She asks if they have real information, not just theories. In 2018, Amber posts on a verified cold case forum, sharing details the police never made public. She explains that normally she would have been sleeping in the room where the burglars entered, which was her room too. But that night, she'd been across the street babysitting. Had the killers gotten lucky? Or had they been watching the house long enough to know the family's schedule? To know when Amber would be gone? To know when Fawn would be alone? Meanwhile, the technology is evolving. DNA databases like CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, go online in 1998, giving investigators a way to compare DNA from crime scenes against samples from convicted criminals. In the early 2000s, Kansas City detectives uploaded Fawn's DNA samples and ran them against the database. No match. The DNA doesn't belong to anyone in the system. Whoever killed Fawn either has no criminal record or was never arrested and processed in a way that would put their DNA into Cody's. The Cox family watches other families get answers. They watch cold cases from the 1970s and 1980s get solved using a new technique called genetic genealogy, the same method that caught the Golden State Killer in 2018. Why not Fawn's case? The answer is as simple as it is heartbreaking: money. Most people don't understand that solving cold cases isn't just about having the right technology. It's about having the funding to use that technology. Genetic genealogy testing is expensive. We're talking thousands of dollars per case. The DNA has to be sent to specialized labs. There are only a handful worldwide that can do this work. Parabon NanoLabs in Virginia, Othram in Texas, a few others. The waiting lists stretch for years. Police departments have limited budgets. They have to choose which cases get priority. A recent murder with good evidence? That goes to the front of the line. A 30-year-old cold case with degraded DNA samples? That waits. For years, Kansas City police have told the Cox family the same thing. We're working on it. We haven't forgotten Fawn. We just need the funding. In 2019, the family decides to take matters into their own hands. They launch a fundraiser. They reach out to Fawn's former classmates from Northeast High, to neighbors, to anyone who remembers the case. They organize events. They plead on social media. Within weeks, they raised $10,000, enough to pay for genetic genealogy testing at Parabon NanoLabs, plus the cost of having professional genealogists build family trees and identify suspects. They walk into the Kansas City Police Department with the money. They're ready. After 30 years, they're finally going to get answers. The police say no. Detective Benjamin Caldwell, who by this point has taken over the missing persons/cold case section, explains the impossible position the department faces. If they accept money from the Cox family, it creates a two-tier justice system. Wealthy families could pay to solve their cases faster. Families without money would wait indefinitely. Their cases would languish while others leapfrog ahead based solely on their ability to pay. It's not fair. It's not right. It violates the fundamental principle that justice should be blind to economic status. Caldwell is sympathetic. He understands the family's frustration, but he can't accept the money. Policy is policy. The Cox family understands the logic. They can see the ethical dilemma. But understanding doesn't ease the pain. It doesn't bring Fawn back. It doesn't answer the question that's haunted them for 3 decades. Who killed our daughter? Felicia says it plainly in an interview. If this had been a rich family or someone important, this case would have been solved immediately. She's right, and everyone knows it. The money goes back into the bank. The case stays cold. Then, in the summer of 2020, everything changed. On June 29, 2020, a 4-year-old boy named Legend Taliaferro was shot and killed while sleeping in his Kansas City apartment. He's one of 5 children murdered in Kansas City in just the first 6 months of 2020. The city is experiencing a crisis of violent crime, with homicides up 40% compared to the previous year. Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas writes to Missouri Governor Mike Parson, calling the situation a crisis point. 8 days later, on July 8, 2020, U.S. Attorney General William Barr announced Operation Legend, a massive federal initiative to combat violent crime in 9 American cities. It's named after Legend Taliaferro. It brings federal resources, FBI agents, and critically, funding for advanced forensic work. The program is controversial. Some see it as a necessary response to spiking violence. Others view it as a politically motivated tough-on-crime push during an election year. But regardless of the politics, Operation Legend brings something tangible: money. Specifically, it provides funding for genetic genealogy testing in cold cases. Captain Ben Caldwell, recently promoted, sees an opportunity. He submits Fawn's case for the new testing protocol under Operation Legend's umbrella. It's approved. For the first time in 31 years, Fawn's case gets the advanced DNA analysis the Cox family has been begging for. The DNA samples collected in 1989, the semen from Fawn's bedsheet, preserved all these years, are sent to Parabon NanoLabs. To understand what happens next, you need to understand how genetic genealogy actually works. Traditional DNA testing, the kind used in criminal databases like Cody's, looks at specific markers called short tandem repeats, or STRs. These are useful for comparing two samples to see if they match. If you have a suspect's DNA and crime scene DNA, STR analysis can tell you definitively if they're the same person. But if you don't have a suspect, if the DNA doesn't match anyone in the criminal database, STR analysis hits a wall. That's where genetic genealogy comes in. Instead of looking at STRs, genetic genealogy examines single nucleotide polymorphisms SNPs, pronounced SNPs. These are tiny variations in DNA that occur throughout the genome. Everyone has about 3 million SNPs, and they're inherited from our parents. Here's the key. SNPs are passed down through generations in predictable patterns. If you share a lot of SNPs with someone, you're closely related. If you share fewer, you're more distantly related, maybe third or fourth cousins. Parabon NanoLabs takes the DNA from Fawn's crime scene and processes it to identify these SNPs. Then they upload that genetic profile to public genealogy database sites like GeneMatch and Family Tree DNA, where people upload their DNA, hoping to find relatives and build family trees. The system searches for matches. Not exact matches, those would only happen if the killer himself had uploaded his DNA, which is unlikely. Instead, it looks for partial matches. Distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who share enough DNA to indicate they have common ancestors. Then comes the real work. Professional genealogists led at Parabon by C.C. Moore, a pioneer in forensic genetic genealogy, start building family trees. They use the DNA matches as starting points, then cross-reference them with public records, census data, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, and newspaper archives. They identify the common ancestors that the DNA matches share. Then they trace all the descendants of those ancestors forward through time, building massive family trees with hundreds or even thousands of people. Somewhere in those trees is the person who left DNA at the crime scene. The genealogists narrow it down methodically. They eliminate people who were the wrong age, wrong location, or wrong gender. They look for people who lived in Kansas City in 1989. Who had access to the Cox home? Who fits the profile? It's painstaking work. It can take weeks or months, but it works. In Fawn's case, it takes less than a month. November 11, 2020. 31 years, 3 months, and 16 days after Fawn's murder. The phone rings at the Cox household. It's the Kansas City Police Department. They've identified the killer. Detective Caldwell's voice is gentle, careful. He knows what he's about to say will shatter this family all over again. The DNA match is definitive. 100% certainty. The person who raped and murdered Fawn has been identified through genetic genealogy. The name he gives them changes everything. Donald Lee Cox Jr. Not a member of the 9th Street Dogs. Not one of the teenagers who confessed to the burglary. Not some stranger who picked the Cox home at random. Donald Cox was Fawn's cousin. Her family. He was 21 years old in 1989, just 5 years older than Fawn. He knew the house intimately. He'd been a guest there dozens of times, attending family dinners, birthday parties, and holiday celebrations. He knew which windows stayed unlocked. He knew the family's routines. He knew about the air conditioner that drowned out the sound. He knew Fawn would be alone upstairs that night, separated from her family. He knew all of it because the Cox family trusted him. For 31 years, Donald sat at family dinners. He passed the salt at Christmas. He looked John and Beverly in the eye at Thanksgiving. He attended Fawn's funeral and mourned alongside the family whose daughter he'd murdered. He never said a word. According to Amber, who speaks publicly about it years later, there had always been something dark about Donald. She reveals that he'd sexually abused younger girls and the family's secrets that were buried in shame and fear, the kind of things families don't talk about, don't report, try to manage internally. But no one imagined he was capable of murder. The Cox family would never get to confront Donald in court, would never get to ask him why, would never hear him confess. Because Donald Lee Cox Jr. died in 2006, 14 years before genetic genealogy caught up to him. Donald's death was investigated as suspicious at the time. He overdosed on drugs in 2006, and because of the circumstances, a medical examiner was called. Standard procedure in potential overdose cases involve an autopsy. Blood samples are taken, analyzed, and preserved. The goal is to determine exactly what drugs were in his system, whether foul play was involved, and whether it was accidental or intentional. In Donald's case, the investigation concluded it was an overdose. The file was closed, but crucially, his blood sample was preserved and stored. Here's the thing about DNA databases. They're built from the DNA of convicted criminals. When someone is arrested for a felony, their DNA goes into Cody's. When someone is a victim of a crime, like an overdose, their DNA doesn't. Donald's DNA sat in storage for 14 years, filed away under his death investigation. It was never cross-referenced with unsolved crimes. There was no reason to. He was a victim, not a suspect. But in 2020, when Parabon's genetic genealogy traced the family tree and identified Donald as a likely suspect, detectives requested that the stored blood sample. They compared it to the semen found on Fawn's bedsheet in 1989. Perfect match. After 31 years, they finally had their answer. The monster had been at the family table all along. Even with Donald identified, questions remain. What about the 3 teenagers? The ones who were arrested in 1989? The ones whose stolen items littered the Cox backyard? The one who confessed to breaking in? Did Donald work with them? Was he part of the burglary crew? Did he climb through that window with them, then stay behind when things went too far? Or did he enter separately, maybe hiding in that upstairs closet while the boys looted downstairs, waiting for his moment, waiting for them to leave? The police closed the case without filing additional charges. According to Felisa, there's no point. Even if those teenagers were in the house that night, a confession strongly suggests at least one of them was there's no evidence they participated in the sexual assault or murder. Only Donald's DNA was found on Fawn. One theory, the burglars came in through Amber and Felisa's window, threw items out to collect later, then left. Donald may have entered the same way, or through a different window. He hid in the upstairs hallway or Fawn's closet, which would explain the disturbed blankets, and waited. Maybe he even waited until the burglars were gone. Maybe he heard them downstairs, stayed silent in the darkness, let them take what they wanted and leave. Then he was alone with Fawn. Another theory, Donald was part of the burglary crew. He knew those teenagers knew them from the neighborhood, from the streets. Maybe the plan was simple theft, but Donald had other intentions. When the others left, he stayed. The truth is, we'll never know for certain. The teenager who confessed withdrew his statement. The DNA tells us Donald committed the murder, but it doesn't tell us who else might have been in the house or what they knew. One thing is certain, at least one person was in that house who wasn't Donald. Someone left that Nintendo and the stereo in the yard. Someone broke the handle off the tape recorder and hid it under the bush. Did they know what Donald was doing while they were stealing? Or did they flee oblivious, leaving Fawn alone with a predator? There's another question that haunts the Cox family and Kansas City detectives. In 1984, 5 years before Fawn's murder, a 20-year-old woman named Tracy Snow vanished from the same neighborhood. She lived close to the Cox family. She was never found. Donald Cox would have been 16 in 1984. Could he have been responsible? And if so, how many other victims might there be? Donald lived 17 years after killing Fawn. During that time, he was arrested repeatedly theft, drugs, and assault. His rap sheet grew. He caused pain and chaos wherever he went. But was he killing? Between 1982 and 1994, a dozen women between 13 and 31 either disappeared or turned up dead in northeast Kansas City. Some were sex workers. Others were just young women in the wrong place at the wrong time. Several were beaten and strangled in the same method used to kill Fawn. Detectives at the time suspected a pattern, possibly a serial killer. But they could never tie the cases together definitively. No DNA matches. No witnesses. No clear suspect. Now, with Donald identified as Fawn's killer, those old cases are being re-examined. Were any of them Donald's victims? Did he start before Fawn? Did he continue after? The DNA evidence from some of those cases has been preserved. Testing is ongoing. But many of the cases are from the early 1980s, before DNA collection was standard practice. Some of the victims were never found, just missing persons reports that eventually went cold. We may never know the full extent of Donald's crimes, but the possibility is chilling. Fawn might not have been his first victim. She might not have been his last. The news that Donald's family, someone they trusted, was Fawn's killer devastated the Cox family in ways that are hard to articulate. There's a particular kind of betrayal that comes with this revelation. When you spend 31 years imagining the killer as a stranger, a monster from outside your world, you can maintain a psychological distance. The evil is out there somewhere. But when you learn the killer sat across from you at Thanksgiving, did he hug you at funerals? That you trusted him, fed him, welcomed him into your home? That's a different kind of trauma. Beverly Cox, now in her 70s, gave an interview after Donald was identified. Her voice was steady, but you could hear the fractures beneath. We kept asking ourselves, how did we miss this? What signs did we not see? Ember was more direct. He sat at our table. He looked us in the eyes. He knew what he'd done, and he never said a word. That's evil in its purest form. The family also grapples with guilt. Those younger girls Donald abused, the ones Amber mentioned, why didn't the family do more? Why didn't they report him to the authorities? Could Fawn's death have been prevented if they'd acted differently? It's an impossible question. In the late 1980s, discussions about sexual abuse within families were even more taboo than they are today. Families often tried to handle things internally. They protected reputations. They worried about shame. But that silence may have cost Fawn her life. The Cox family has been public about this, not to excuse their earlier inaction, but to warn other families. If you see signs of abuse, report it. Don't assume it will stay contained. Don't assume it won't escalate. Because it can. And it did. Captain Ben Caldwell, speaking to the press after Donald was identified, chose his words carefully. This one touched a lot of people. She was an innocent child who was murdered in her own bed. Her family never gave up. He's right about that. The Cox family never gave up. For 31 years they fought. They fundraised. They kept Fawn's name alive. They refused to let her become just another statistic, another cold case file gathering dust in a storage room. But there's a bitter irony in the resolution. Donald died in 2006. He lived 17 years after murdering Fawn, 17 years free, while Fawn's family suffered. He was never arrested for her murder. Never charged. Never stood trial. Never heard a jury say guilty. He escaped earthly justice entirely. Some people call it karma that he died from an overdose. The drugs that he'd been arrested for again and again finally killed him. There's a poetic symmetry to that. But for the Cox family, it feels more like an escape. Donald died without ever having to face what he did. Without ever having to sit across from John and Beverly Cox and explain why. Without ever having to see Fawn's photo in a courtroom. A prosecutor detailed his crimes. He got away with it, in the most literal sense. The only justice the Cox family received was knowledge. After 31 years of not knowing, they finally know. The answer to who killed Fawn has been definitively answered. But knowledge isn't accountability. Truth isn't the same as punishment. And that's a reality the Cox family has to live with. Fawn's case represents a watershed moment in the evolution of forensic science. When she was murdered in 1989, DNA testing was in its infancy. The first DNA-based conviction in the United States happened in 1987, just 2 years before Fawn's death. The technology was expensive, unreliable, and required pristine samples. By the time Fawn's case went cold, investigators had preserved DNA evidence, but they had no way to use it effectively. Cody's didn't launch until 1998, and even then, it only worked if your suspect was in the database. Genetic genealogy changed everything. The technique was first used in a criminal investigation in 2018 to identify the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. That case opened the floodgates. Suddenly, cold cases that had been unsolvable for decades became viable again. As of 2025, genetic genealogy has helped solve hundreds of cold cases. Murders from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s are being cracked. Victims' families are getting answers. Serial killers who thought they'd escape justice are being identified. But the technique is also controversial. Privacy advocates worry about the implications of using public genealogy databases for law enforcement purposes. When you upload your DNA to a site like GeneMatch or Family Tree DNA to find relatives, are you consenting to police using that information to investigate your third cousins? Some sites have updated their terms of service to address this. Match now has an opt-in system. Users must explicitly allow law enforcement to use their DNA for investigations. There are also concerns about genetic privacy. Your DNA reveals information not just about you, but about your relatives. If police use your cousin's DNA to build a family tree that identifies you as a suspect, have your rights been violated? These are complex questions without easy answers. But for families like the Coxes, the ethical debates fade into the background. What matters is that genetic genealogy gave them something they'd been searching for since 1989, the truth. Fawn Marie Cox should be 51 years old today. She should have graduated from Northeast High School in 1991. Should have gone to college or started a career. Should have gotten married, maybe had children. Should have grown old alongside her sisters, Amber and Felisa. She should have watched her parents become grandparents. Should have been at family dinners, passing the potatoes, telling stories about her own kids. Instead, she's frozen at 16. Forever young in photographs, in memories, in the minds of people who loved her. But she is not forgotten. Her case helped pioneer the use of federal funding for genetic genealogy in cold cases. Operation Legend, whatever its political motivations, brought resources that Kansas City couldn't afford on its own. Fawn's case was one of the first to benefit. Her story also serves as a stark reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it sits at your dinner table, smiling. The orange dumpster truck that served as a ladder for a killer still exists in old photographs. The house on Van Brunt Boulevard still stands, though the Cox family no longer lives there. The window that was always unlocked for emergencies became the entry point for a nightmare. But those symbols have changed meaning now. They're no longer just reminders of vulnerability. They're evidence. Pieces of a puzzle that took 31 years to solve. Fawn's alarm clock rang on the morning of July 26, 1989, trying to wake a girl who would never wake again. But in a larger sense, Fawn's case was an alarm that rang for 3 decades, a persistent reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, still matters. Her family made sure that the alarm never stopped ringing. And eventually, someone answered. If you've made it this far, thank you for witnessing Fawn's story. These cases aren't easy to tell or to hear. They're uncomfortable. They're tragic. They force us to confront the worst of human nature. But they matter. Victims like Fawn deserve to be remembered not just as statistics, not just as cold case numbers, but as real people with dreams and futures that were stolen from them. Their families deserve to be heard, to have their decades of pain and persistence acknowledged. And the science that finally solved Fawn's case, genetic genealogy, forensic DNA analysis, and the tireless work of investigators who never gave up, deserves to be understood and supported. If this story moved you, consider supporting organizations that help solve cold cases. Consider donating to the DNA Doe Project, which uses genetic genealogy to identify unknown victims. Consider reaching out to your local police department and asking about their cold case unit's needs. And if you're a family member of a cold case victim, don't give up. The technology exists now. The science works. It's a matter of funding and priority. Keep fighting. Keep your loved one's name alive. The Cox family did, and after 31 years, they finally got their answer. Rest in peace, Fawn Marie Cox. Your fight is over. Your family made sure you were never forgotten. And your story will help others find the truth they're searching for. Subscribe for more deep dives into cold cases told with the respect and detail they deserve. Share this with anyone who believes justice matters, no matter how long it takes. And remember, sometimes the answers we seek take decades to find, but they're worth fighting for.